moderating. I'm Tim Finnerty. I'm a shareholder at Clayton McKervey. We're focused on industrial automation companies, manufacturing companies, and engineering companies. So this integrated conference is good for us. Our focus is trying to help be the trusted advisors for our clients and others. So I brought together a panel of experts that can help us with understanding the future of work, right? So now that we're in this new era, what does that mean? So to my right here, we have Joe Bamberger, the managing partner from Emerge Consulting. Joe can, when he introduces himself, he can give a little bit more about. We have Stephanie Murphy from Avisa, and then also from Clayton McKervey, we have Brian Prozek, a senior manager. So Joe, why don't you introduce yourself and kind of give a little background on what you do?
Yeah, thanks, Tim. As Tim mentioned, my name is Joe Bamberger, and I'm the managing partner of Emerge Consulting. At Emerge, we focus on helping businesses create long-term workforce development strategies, specifically by helping them attract, develop, and retain emerging talent. So we focus primarily on helping them create relationships with educational communities to recruit students out of high schools, community colleges, and universities.
And we also use Joe as a resource to help us with our, campus recruiting, our experience recruiting, and other things as well. Next, we have Stephanie.
Hi there, Stephanie Murphy. I work with an organization called Advisa. At Advisa, we know that organizations want to be employer of choices, but they are struggling right now with the Great Resignation. They are struggling with talent, leaving managers feeling overwhelmed and staff feeling stressed. So we help design, deploy, and ultimately diagnose organizational dysfunction and helping organizations become stronger places to work and more attractive places to work.
We also have used Stephanie to help our organization try to figure out this new hybrid workplace. We're going through that right now as a consultant. I use her as a coach as well to help me understand how to better, communicate with my staff or with others within our organization. So she's a great resource, and hopefully we'll have some good information. And now, Brian?
Brian Prozek, Senior Manager at Clayton McKervey. I work in our industrial automation practice. Work closely with Tim on a lot of stuff, and thanks, Tim, for letting me out of the office today. I promise I'll go right back to work after this. So we work with a lot of automation companies, system integrators, distributors, manufacturers of robotics, sensors, things like that, to help grow their business and get to where they want to see their business when they eventually retire and sell.
Great. All right, so when we're thinking about the future of work, right, one of the big things, and I'll start this off with Stephanie and then we can go, but how does building a culture in a hybrid work different than in the traditional or in-person environment?
Yeah, I think anybody here who's been experiencing the hybrid work culture or the remote work culture can say it's a lot more difficult because we don't have those organic interactions that are happening anymore when we were in the workplace. There's Neil Miller from the Digital Workplace. He talks about the difference between forest cultures and garden cultures, and I think in the past, when we have these physical workplaces where everyone's interacting with, just by nature of being there, giving space and interacting and kind of pollinating with each other, our cultures grow. And we have to be a lot more intentional about how we approach culture now, and it is more of this garden type of culture. We have to think about how people interact, what they need, how do we create intentional spaces. And so it does require a whole new thinking, and it's actually very system level thinking too. It's not just about, oh, we want to do great things with culture, so let's have more all team meetings anymore. We really have to think about how we coach, how we engage, and how we make people feel like they are contributing and they are noticed and connected in the workplace.
Joe, how do you, when you're out there on campus recruiting or different things and trying to do or talk with the new people coming in, what do you see? How do you explain this new culture?
Yeah, when you look at Gen Z, which is the high school and college students right now, right? They tend to be a lot more focused on learning development opportunities than any previous generation. And so the questions they're asking, the things they're focused on are, in a hybrid environment or in a virtual environment, what resources are there for me to learn, develop, get exposed to a variety of different work. And so what we focus on is explaining to them the type of experiences, the internal staff they're going to work with, the external clients that they're going to get engaged with, what sort of organized and planned training and development programs there are. That's their motivation, is continuously learning and growing. And so that's what we focus on from a culture standpoint for that generation.
And Brian, any thoughts? Now you get to report up and down, so you see both generations. What do you take from this new?
Yeah, it's a real challenge, as Stephanie kind of alluded to, that for so many years we built this culture because you saw the people every day, you worked with them, you picked up habits from people. Well, now the only person I see every day is my wife when I come out of my home office, and so if I want to try and teach one of our newer staff or show our newer members of our staff how something gets done, I have to make a conscious decision to say, hey, let's meet in the office on Tuesday so we can sit down and go through this problem. Or even let's just meet in the office. That's one of the things I've changed about my routine was the days I go into the office now, I try to leave my to-do list open because I never know who's going to be in the office, what conversation I might get into. And so it's making me change how I'm working. And so now it's even more challenging because the group that Joe's talking about, they're coming into an environment that we're all going through in the first time as well. So there's no one they can look to. So you're trying to help them kind of guide their way through the process as well. So it's Stephanie used the word intentionality, and that's really a lot of what I'm seeing is that within our firm, within our clients, people are just being very, very intentional about the things they do and the way they do it.
Great. So any of you guys can take this one. The next question I have is, kind of feeding on that a little bit. How can technology be leveraged to impact the team and lead effectiveness?
I can jump in really quick. I think there's a lot of research and data out there that shows that technology-driven leaders win. They're actually 2 times more effective in creating and maintaining stress levels. They're also 5 times more effective in actually creating connected cultures. I think technology is also a critical part when we talk about leadership development and all of these things because Bill Gates has a quote, and he says that we often overestimate the change that's going to happen in 2 years, but we underestimate the change that's going to happen in 10 years. And I think right now we are underestimating what this hybrid environment is going to do to our leadership workforce and leadership readiness within the next 10 years. If I don't see Brian leading at a regular basis and we're not creating intentional connection cultures, our leaders are not going to be ready. So right now we have this frontline skill gap, and we're going to continue to see that grow, and it's going to widen as we get into leadership skill gap within the next 8 to 10 years from here. So technology is really a critical piece to help us make those connections, and there's so many cool technologies out there. We have a lot of clients that use certain ones for engagement, certain ones to better understand who's in my staff. If you have a global staff and trying to understand what kind of skills do they have, because we don't get that the same way anymore. Because if I've hired somebody who's been working remotely, I don't always understand it, or I'm not always hearing about their background and their skill and their interactions. And in fact, I've been working with Clayton and McKervey for the last decade now, and there are some new individuals who have come on who I've only worked with remotely. And if I'm not intentional enough about it, I miss the fact that this person walked onto a rowing team, or that they have these connections in different ways. And those are things that become really critical. So I think where we can use technology in leadership development, we're going to see more engagement, we're going to see more connection, and people feeling like they're very connected. So.
Yeah, I think to add on to that too, right? Completely agree, right? Technology is going to differentiate you from your competitors and your peers, but remembering that technology is a tool in your toolbox, right? It's not meant to replace everything that you do, right? It's meant to make things easier or more efficient. And when you look at, and talking about college students specifically, right? They've gone through the past couple of years learning virtually, and as a result, they are burnt out from being in an entire virtual environment, right? If you think about even yourselves, and if you have to sit through one more Zoom conference or one more Zoom call, right? You need to kind of diversify the ways in which you're engaging and which you're teaching your staff, and relying exclusively on technology tools. As Stephanie was talking about, right, you kind of lose the connection, the bonding that she might have had at face-to-face. And so creating some variety within that, and remembering that they are tools in your toolbox and not fix-all solutions.
And it can't be one way. I think that's it. It can't be one-way communications, because I think that's where we miss out.
And Joe, isn't that really another way to kind of engage some of those younger, digital natives who, they live their lives in their phones, right? Mm-hmm. So rather than me trying to dictate to the staff the technologies we should use and the ways we should use them, that gives you another way of engaging them to help figure this out, because they're going to be more adept at it probably anyways.
Yeah, absolutely. And everyone likes to communicate in their own way, right? Some people are better at text, some people are better at phone calls, some people prefer video, some people never turn their cameras on, right? Everyone has different personalities and backgrounds that's going to suit best for their personality. And so understanding that, learning that, and utilizing that to help you with those connections is definitely beneficial.
From your guys' standpoint, what is one technology that you really like? Not Zoom or something like that. And what's one that you want to kind of get rid of, or think people are using it too much, if there is something like that? I'll start with Brian, since he's kind of the tech guy down there.
I guess technology I really like isn't exciting, but from a professional standpoint, OneNote has really been big for me. I mean, pulls together a lot of the functionality of different applications that Microsoft has. And in our environment, especially being remote now, to be able to share a OneNote with you and you can see real time what I'm doing, that has been really helpful. One I'd like to get rid of, I don't know that I'd want to get rid of it, but I'd like to limit the reliance on it, is, especially as things start to open back up, are the Zooms and the Teams and the videos. I mean, it's so easy to say, oh, let's just jump on a call here versus, hey, let's meet in the office. I know it's going to take each of us a commute and all those things, but understanding, and Stephanie, you talk about this, is understanding the right medium. Is this a conversation we need to have face-to-face? Is this a conversation that's best handled over Zoom? And weighing the pros and cons of each. So I wouldn't get rid of it altogether, but I do miss the face-to-face interaction.
Yeah. So there's a couple technologies that I really like. One is Predictive Index, which is a tool that helps us understand workplace motivation and how we make connections. So that is a tool that does help us, especially in the remote environment, get closer and more connected to how people want to work. So I think that that's really a tool. But another that has come about is a tool called 15.5. And it's an app-based tool that allows you to create engagement conversations and prompts engagement conversations. But it goes beyond just like the overall check-in. It will prompt you with some deeper conversation levels, and I think that's fantastic. If I could get rid of email, I would get rid of email. Just the amount and the way that we use email and the way that we kind of bog down our conversations, that would be one. And I think that a lot of conversations that should be done face-to-face or in real time are left to email, and the interpretation just gets lost, and we tend to lose people because they misjudge our intentions. And so we always say that we judge others by their behaviors. We judge ourselves by our intentions. And when our intentions don't match up with somebody else's belief of behaviors, we can have this huge disconnect and miscommunication. So.
For me, honestly, it's tools that make my life easier. So, right, obviously in the recruiting space, anything that can automate the process for me, right, that can, send, feeler emails or thank you for applying emails, or I'm a big fan of the Calendly or any of the CRM things that, students can schedule time on, to meet with you directly on your calendar, right? Anything that stops the back and forth of the unnecessary emails, right? I'm obviously a big fan, and when you look at the HR space in general, there's a ton of technologies that help automate the engagement process for you. Whether you're looking for an applicant tracking system, CRM type style software, or video interviewing, both one-way or two-way video interviews. There's a ton of tools out there that make the process easier to make sure that your hiring process is streamlined, efficient, and the candidates have positive experiences. So for me, those types of tools are things that free up my time to focus on the more important tasks rather than sending 1,000 emails every day. So I would agree with Stephanie that unnecessary emails, especially ones that you're copied on just for your information, tend to be a big waste of my time having to go through every day and be like, all right, I'm in the loop, but did I really need 6 emails back and forth on this along the way?
I would agree with the email sentiment. I think there's just so much of it. But Brian mentioned Teams sometimes too much. But what I like about Teams now is kind of that same thing on like with the OneNote. Is within Teams you can put documents in there and kind of group it into certain things. So if you're working on a assignment with a certain group of people, everything's right there rather than having to go back and search for it in email, right? So I think some of those things of making it more effective and efficient, that's helpful. Before I go on to the next question, any questions in the audience? Does anyone have anything that they want to ask or different things?
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. My question resides around everybody's commenting on email and the use of email. What are your thoughts of actual providing training to your employees on the proper use of email? I mean, I know for sure that when I started many years ago, there was no training on email. So you get a lot of people that send shotgun emails and they just don't understand the proper usage of emails. So I was just interested in your input on the actual purpose of training on actual use of email.
So just something I hear a lot from clients everywhere is they wish that their entry-level staff had email etiquette and were taught that at the college level, right? Hitting reply all when you don't need to hit a reply all, or using complete sentences, or addressing or closing things out the right way. I think that's a skill that is never taught. I don't know many companies that put any investment into teaching that email etiquette, but I know tons of companies that complain about it every day, especially when you have the youth coming into your organization and they're used to quick text messages or DMs through chats and things like that, right? They're not used to the formality of a traditional email, and I think that would be an excellent thing to train on based on the amount of complaints I hear about it.
Yeah. I was actually going to defer my answer to Stephanie because I know we've talked about this in the past, but that kind of goes back to the intentionality of, we never thought about that, or even like meetings, like having kind of ground rules for meetings and what are we going to do in meetings, et cetera. And you guys talk a lot about that, of really having conversations around that, of what's appropriate for an email versus maybe a text versus a team. So
yeah, and I
set that up and hand it off to
well,
you.
thanks. I so appreciate it. I do think there is the how we use email, and then there's the when and why that comes into it. And so I do actually think that it's very company specific, because I do have organizations that you have leaders who still want to be copied on every single thing if we're micromanaging and they've got that culture. And so there's a different thing kind of that comes into that email conversation that even goes beyond. So I don't think that there's a hard and fast rule, but I do think there's a benefit of re-establishing what it looks like to have email, to utilize it. And as Brian mentioned, we're taking this even so far as to look at meetings. And we've never in the past really thought about what's the goal of the meeting and what's the role of the participants. And if we start to ask that question about like, what are the roles and goals of this email, you might have different answers as to why I might include somebody or not. Because sometimes I think, oh, I just need to inform this person. But the reality is, do they need to be involved? And I think we can teach people a little bit better if we ask them, what's my role? Thanks for sending this email. What would you like me to do with this? Oh, this is just an FYI. Thanks, considered me informed. You can drop me off the list. And what we just start to do is teach people how to interact with us more effectively. But it is going to take some skill, and I think that it's a little more custom than saying, here's the blanket thing, other than some of the email etiquette that we have.
Looking from staff, from the bottom up, a lot of younger staff feel that they have to include everyone on emails as a kind of a CYA in the process, right? If they didn't include someone, right, it's kind of proving that I did this and I did it the way you asked. And right or wrong, a lot of that staff feels that it is a micromanagement type thing, that they need to do that.
There's a technology piece to that too, because especially if you are in a large organization, so anybody in here, 1,000 person or more organization, right? So you start to have large organizations and you're bringing in remote people, they don't know who to go to. So my sister just started working with Amazon, an amazing company, but she's working and she has to send like 6 or 7 emails to various people to try to figure out who's got the answer to certain things. And so it becomes really challenging for her to be efficient and effective. So some of those technologies that help us understand who the right person is and who the right contacts are become really critical, because we don't have that anymore, and we don't have that drive-by to say, Brian, who should I ask for this, right? You're just sitting in your office by yourself looking at a directory and saying, I hope it's you, right? And so I think there's a lot of cultural pieces to that as well.
Great. Any other questions before we get back to? All right. So I guess getting back to a little bit of the technology, when we're thinking about this, how should team members, new or long-term, find out how they are doing and how to grow? Like with this new hybrid workforce, what are you seeing, or how do you feel like what people should be doing?
I'll jump on that just because you're looking right at me, Tim. So I think gone are the days of the twice a year or once a year performance reviews. So if that's something that your organization is using, I would say it's an archaic way to go through and keep people connected to the work that they need to do. Moving into more agile coaching, where you are meeting on, I would say, a weekly, if possible, but at worst case scenario, a bi-weekly basis around 90-day goals is going to be much more effective for you as far as, and utilizing the technology to help support those things. Otherwise, things are changing too quickly. I mean, especially in this world, in the automation world, new technologies, new ideas, all of these things are happening, and we have to find ways to make sure that people feel connected to the big picture. So certainly agile coaching is a big part of it, and utilizing the tools and technology that you have at your fingertips. Whether that is, just auto-scheduling sometimes is a great thing to do. Let's just set that up. We don't have to think about it, because it's much easier to change an appointment that's on your calendar than it is to find time on your calendar at a later date. So creating that and being more connected is certainly a space that we're going to need people to be thinking about as far as growth goes.
Yeah, kind of 2 other points on that I see a lot is, one is separating those conversations from compensation reviews,
yes.
Right? If you're putting them together, right, you're not going to create any environment for growth, because the employee is going to be focused on making themselves sound as good as possible so they get the pay increase they're looking for. And the manager could potentially be in a position where they are looking to put them down in order to justify not providing them the pay increase they're looking for. And so separating those 2 processes, performance review and coaching, from compensation review is kind of key, because then you create an environment where you can be open, honest, transparent about how you're doing, what you're doing well, what you need to improve on, and then actually using it as a coaching session for how to improve. And then the second thing that kind of leads into that transparency piece is creating key performance indicators or ways for me to see how I'm doing without those conversations. Right? You might have to get creative in some of the roles on being able to track that data and that information, but I promise you there's something in every role that you can track, so that way someone knows how they're doing before they walk into that meeting. Those types of conversations should never come as a surprise. You should be able to look at the data and know how you're performing in your role for the most part. And with the technologies we have now, so much of that can be automated for, within real time to see kind of how I'm doing.
Yeah, we, over the last couple of years with Stephanie's help, we kind of adjusted our process to be more like that. We call it real-time coaching, but essentially we went from, you'd wait 3 months to give somebody feedback, and then in that time they've prepared how many tax returns with the same issue to, on a more frequent basis, sitting down and kind of building off what Joe says, we identified like 4 critical areas. These are the 4 things you really need to be doing well to succeed at your level. Okay, how did you do against those? Not a 1 to 10 scale, but are you meeting it, not meeting it? And then you can focus the conversation in on that. And as we've shifted more virtual, one of the things I've tried to do with my staff is even break down, rather than giving them a whole assignment and say, hey, do this whole project you've never done before, let's start with step 1. And I want you to go through step 1, get to this point, and then stop, and let's check back in. It may seem a little counterintuitive because now I'm checking in with that person more frequently, but by the time they get done with step 1, I can fix any errors before they go into step 2, rather than getting through step 10 and saying, well, you screwed up in step 1 and everything since then is wrong. So that's been helpful for me, especially because I'm not in a situation where my staff can just walk 10 feet and ask me a question, then go back to work. I'm maybe on another Zoom call or doing something else, and I think there's a little bit of hesitation. Even though it's all they have to do is click, dial. It's not as easy as walking up to somebody's desk. So.
And I think that's something that resonates with candidates specifically on campuses is they're worried about making mistakes.
Yeah.
Right. And I think if you create an environment where it's okay to make mistakes, it's just not okay to continue to make that same mistake over and over. Right. Make a mistake. Meet with your team leads or your managers, learn from it, so that way you can go on and make the next more challenging mistake.
Yep.
And then you learn from that one and you go on and make the next more challenging mistake, right? That freedom to make mistakes, that freedom to be wrong, without the fear of repercussions, right? Where it's viewed as all right, this is a learning opportunity, is the environment you want to set.
Okay, I think we have a question out in the audience.
No? Oh, there it is. A little delay. So are you using project software with your employees to keep track of these goals, or what kind of software are you using?
So we use a software called PerformYard that has goal setting, performance planning, like all that's kind of built in. Well, and that's for more of our like staff and senior level. They all use that software, but then we're all in it. So if somebody works with Tim more on a job, he'll probably schedule the review with Tim versus me, even though I may oversee their overall performance plan. But then we try to within there we can set goals and tie real-time coaching sessions back into their goals and say, hey, based upon what you were trying to accomplish here, this is something you should focus on for the next month or whatever it might be. PerformYard? PerformYard. Yeah. I don't know. You guys probably know more softwares than I do.
For us, it's a little easier, right? An applicant tracking system or a CRM, right, tracks those communication data points really easy. So it's a lot easier in a sales or recruiting space than it might be in a service-based industry.
I do think that there's a lot of HRIS systems, human resource information systems, that are out there that many of your companies are probably already utilizing. We just typically don't expand those beyond the hiring space very often. And I think to Joe's point earlier, getting a lot more clarity around not just what needs to be done, but how people need to go about doing it. Because we can come to solutions, we can get to answers, but if people aren't doing it the way that we want to, the tax return is prepared, but if we haven't gotten it in the right time, we haven't done the right communication with the clients and all of those things, there are still things to correct. A little earlier, I was over and just kind of popped into a conversation, and they were talking about a concept that I'd never heard before. If somebody knows it, please tell me. But it was this idea of automation with a human touch. Does anybody remember what they called it? started with a J, I couldn't remember, but it's really interesting because what they did is they were talking about this idea that when something goes wrong in automation, it changes the way that we approach it. We actually stop the system, everybody comes together and does root cause analysis right in the moment. And that's what we're really talking about. We can apply that same concept into this idea of agile coaching. Because a lot of times we wait till things go, we've created and manufactured multiple parts with this defect, and then we don't realize it until later or until the end of the shift. Same thing happens with coaching. So if we can find ourselves in a space like Brian's talking about, breaking down some of those things, capturing it in real time, we're not going to keep repeating those mistakes, and they're not going to keep building on each other. So certainly there's lots of opportunities there. But.
So an interesting, you guys both talking about, being able to make mistakes and different things like that. But, in this new world of hybrid work, and basically, onboarding people differently and spending time with them differently, how do you, you talk about the agileness of getting it and stopping it, but part of this is how do you manage to that so that you just don't let them go on and on and on and make the mistakes because you're not checking in because you got other stuff going on. So, what have you seen as successes for onboarding new employees?
Yeah, I can jump in. So something we see a lot of is providing additional resources than you might otherwise, right? You're going to do that initial onboarding, that initial training, everything that you've historically always done as a company, but providing resources for your new hires or candidates to be able to go back and research. So learning management systems are becoming very popular right now, where maybe your training is recorded or automated online in some way. So you've gone through the training maybe face-to-face or virtually, via video, but then having a resource that your new hires can go back to for reference, right? Onboarding tends to be a lot of drinking, through a fire hose, right? It's more information than you could ever possibly retain in one sitting, and so having resources that I can then go back to and reference as I'm starting that work is incredibly valuable.
I'm definitely seeing an uptick, and we're encouraging a lot of our clients to look at mentorship for the onboarding space. I mentioned earlier about the Predictive Index, and one of the things that has changed, and when we use that technology, is we actually match people up based on their learning styles. So if we can understand those things, if I'm a person who's just big picture, tell me where you want me to go and set me free, I often tell people I'm like an arrow, just like give me the general direction, right? You don't have to give me all of the other information. And so if I'm that person and I'm working with somebody who is very linear and step by step, and I'm the one who's training them, coaching them, I'm going to make them absolutely crazy because I'm thinking out here and they're still wondering, wait a minute, what am I supposed to do in step one? So where we can find ways and match people in mentorship and having that resource. So even when they do go through the online, because we're seeing a huge uptick in the LMS, that again, learning management system, but even when they do go through that, I can go back to Joe as my mentor and say, hey, Joe, there was this one thing that I just didn't really understand. Can you help me understand that a little bit better? And he's going to bring it in a language and speak to me in a way that actually does support the way I interact.
We see that even below the mentor level. I mean, Clayton McKervey does a great job with their buddy program, right? Having someone that's new to the company as well, maybe been there 2 years or less, that you can kind of say I don't feel bad about going to them with a stupid question, right? Because it's not a manager, it's not a boss, it's not a mentor, right? It's someone that's more or less at the same level of me that can kind of help guide me through those maybe embarrassing to ask questions.
Yeah. I do have just speaking to that, I have a client that has a shepherd. They have a shepherd, so they will give somebody. So the idea that the mentor maybe has already been there, but the shepherd walks alongside you. So I think that's really cool too, because it doesn't have to be somebody in leadership. So certainly tapping into that. The cool thing about technology is that you can actually leverage a lot more people in your organization to onboard than you ever could before. So think about what are the different layers and how we can bring people to.
Yeah, and I think that's the hard part of talking with, and prior to coming to Clayton McKervey, I worked in engineering, so I've seen this on both sides, and I think regardless of what industry you're in, there's this assumption that if I'm coming in, I'm supposed to know how to do this job. Right. And so that's where Joe mentioned creating this environment where people are comfortable failing, and you mentioned in the response to the one question of, it's going to look different for every company. In Clayton McKervey, it looks different at every level. The support we give a new staff person versus a 5-year person is completely different. We try to tailor it to what they're doing, and I can't believe in my engineering career we onboarded and developed and grew people without a tool like Predictive Index, because it's the old adage of if your only tool is a hammer, then every problem looks like a nail.
Right.
My assumption for every person who unfortunately had to work with me when I was in engineering was, you're going to do the job the same way I do. And if you're not doing it, then you're not doing it right. And so the Predictive Index kind of helps me pull back and say, okay, even though this might be the way I would grow and develop, I need to give this person more of this and adjust my style to what they need, which ultimately will help them advance faster.
I know one thing, what you guys are talking about as well, this tailored approach is really an important thing, I think. I think that's one thing that's come out of this hybrid environment, right? Understanding that everybody is a little bit different and that you really do need to tailor it. And we've been talking internally a little bit about Nano Trainings, right? Basically, these onboarding processes, you sit through 8 hours of, here it is and there it is, but basically videoing those things and basically making them little nano, 15 minutes long, so you can digest it or go back to it when you need that information, right? And not everybody does it that way, but some people like it that way. As Stephanie said, I'm a big pictured person. I hate sitting through 8 hours or something, but if I do a 15-minute, nano training, I can pick up on that and then figure out how to help my clients or help train and develop someone else. So I think, when we look at, we talk about hybrid and all this and the pros and cons, I think as we continue down this road, we'll see that there's a lot of pros that are going to come out of this. It's just how do you implement them correctly? And maybe the biggest one will be we'll get rid of email. So.
Yeah, thanks for your time today. The question I had kind of shifts gears to networking and team building events. Wondering what you're seeing in that field. I know in terms of events and stuff that we've done, it's been pretty much a mixed bag of results and responses. Have you seen anything that's worked well and anything that hasn't worked well?
I think, the real challenge there, at least from what I've seen, is that for maybe the more introverted side of the office they would go to the Christmas party or the holiday party or whatever you want to say, kind of out of obligation. Now they almost have a built-in out, right? That I don't have to leave my house. I can just say I was busy or whatever. So it really, to me, and what I've heard some of my clients do, I have one client that is out in Phoenix who has talked about once his leases are up, drastically shrinking his footprint, and then having once a trimester, once a quarter, whatever it is, fly-ins, where he gets the whole company together and you'll do some big, planning meetings and social events and things like that to try and encourage that. I think the typical accounting answer, it depends it depends on the size of the organization, it depends on the people you're working with, but really finding what's important to them, because for one member of my staff, it might just be a face-to-face lunch once a month. But then for another group of our staff, they're going to want to have the happy hour on Friday and get 20 people together and do it all. So it requires more, but to me, this whole debate on hybrid, remote, whatever, is kind of the tip of a larger problem of the shrinking, and Joe, you can speak to this, the shrinking pool of workers. And so you're going to have to get really creative to attract and retain those people, because everybody else is competing for the same ever-shrinking pool. And so hybrid's just going to be one element to deal with. But
yeah, I mean, to Brian's point, right, there's not a one-size-fits-all answer, right? And I think something that most companies forget to do or don't give enough credence to is asking employees what they want from an engagement perspective, right? Some might want those one-on-one lunches, some might want the happy hours, right? And being flexible enough as an organization to cater to all your audiences, right? You don't want to only focus on the majority or only focus on the minority, right? You want to focus on everyone and engaging people in a way that they want to be engaged. Some people, the introverts, right, if we're playing stereotypes, right, might not want to get together in group situations, and maybe they want an additional perk or benefit that speaks to them specifically. And so kind of catering your engagement level based on what individuals are looking for.
I think the big word that a lot of people use right now is intentional, right? Be intentional with what you're doing, right? Really trying to understand your team or who you're doing it for, because I think it makes a lot of sense.
Last thing I would probably add is think about micro team building as opposed to these very large things, because what happens is when you can put together smaller groups and you do orchestrate a little bit, give them some structure around things that they work on or things that they interact with, questions or those kind of things. If I've spent 2-3 quarters interacting with this small group of people, and I now have the opportunity to see them face to face, it's much more likely that I'm going to show up because I do feel like I have that connection. I think we are disconnected in the remote workspace, and so if we do feel that, it could be 50-50. Like I might show up and it might be okay, but if I can create those smaller connection pods, that could be very, very helpful inside of your teams as well. For example, in my organization, we do TLC pods, and we do not talk about work at all. They are around different things, and so my current pod that I've been working with, we all had to learn something new outside of like our skill set, and so we decided that we were going to learn about like the history of Sesame Street, and so it was just kind of a funny, odd thing, but we're bringing that and like what we're learning about that into just like how does this reflect in our lives and do things like that. So there's different things that you can do, but I would say start and try with the micro connections, because many of you have probably seen that your organizations look very different. And if you've hired a lot of remote employees, they just haven't had those. So start there, and then the larger ones will be better attended.
I mean, I think one other thing related to a lot of that is we were just talking about this earlier today about, what activities do people like, right? What do they like to do? The same thing, introverts, they like to go coffee shop. It's really trying to get more information, grab as much data as we possibly can from what everybody is doing, and then trying to put it into something that then spits out, oh yeah, we could do this or we could do that. And as Stephanie's saying, use the information that we have to be better and use the technology, to help us with this. We're all still learning, but I think it's coming around. We got just about a minute left. Any final thoughts from the? We got one. Oh, we got a question. Go.
Good afternoon. So my question was, as industries are going back into work, how do you make sure that the technology and the face-to-face meetings are kind of divided, where technology isn't a distraction from those face-to-face interactions?
So we actually did this with Clayton McKervey and really sat down and talked about what are we trying to accomplish for certain meetings, certain connections, and what's the best format for that. When you think about, there's different reasons that we meet. I mean, one is for information, just straight information. A lot of times those things can be delivered in a virtual format, a digital format. We don't necessarily need to be face-to-face for those, but things like innovation, where I need creativity and ideas and those spur from each other, being in a room or in space together, those just tend to work better. We also have better retention when we're in a 360-degree space. So even though there are a lot of great tools that can bring us together, we can't go back to that moment where we say, oh yeah, I remember in that back corner we had this. Do you remember we drew with that red marker? Those things can actually trigger more retention. So even when we think about adult learning and how and the learning styles that we go about, I would really think about what do we need to accomplish and how will people be able to interact best with that.
Any final thoughts?
We're at our time.
I know,
so.
but I meant with Brian or Joe.
There was one other quick question if we.
I just wanted to say that I was in HR eons ago, and so it's always interesting to be reminded of a lot of this stuff. We're in a manufacturing environment, though, we have press operators and things like that, and I do find that a lot of these conversations are around service economy.
Yes.
And I think, from my clients who have a similar situation where, maybe they've got a panel shop or a build shop, so half of the office can work from home and the other half has to come in, and now you get this bit of animosity, right? That, well, we're the ones always coming in, and these people have it so easy, and I wish I had a silver bullet, but I think the best thing is kind of where Stephanie Tar is having those conversations, and okay, we know you're going to have to be in, and I'm sure you guys are doing that, but we know you have to come in the office, so how do we make this, flexible for you in terms of hours or roles or assignments or things like that? But yeah, that is a very difficult, I'd probably say half of my client base are more pure service, and then it's really hard when there's a place people have to be, but asking those folks and getting their input is probably the most critical piece to try and find a way that, knowing that you need to be in here, how can we make this as enjoyable and as beneficial as possible for you?
Yeah, so I think a final thought there is, as Brian was saying, again, and we talked about it earlier, is asking, right? Trying to get a better understanding of what is it that everyone wants, and then is there a way to make it might be different for each person, but is it capable? I was just down at a manufacturing plant in Kentucky of one of my clients, and they, their employees want to do like 3 12-hour shifts or different things like that. So, and then get a few days off, right? So they're moving different things around. They're excited about having more time at home and different things like that. Okay. So I think that's.
I know we're at our time, so if anybody has to leave, but I just want to say this because I work with a lot of manufacturing shops, and when we're on the floor, leadership development is the most critical and the best investment that you can make if you want to retain and engage people. Your leaders, your managers, your frontline supervisors are the window by which your people see the organization. So it doesn't matter how good you are, it doesn't matter how great things you're doing out in the world, what the news is reporting about you. If I come in every single day and I work for a jerk, I'm not going to do it, right? And so we want people talking and bringing their friends. So I will tell you, hands down, it is one of the best things that you can do. And we've got a lot of research around frontline supervisor programs that actually will show the results with that.